And we're rolling. Good evening, Nate. Back again on late night video duty. So when I saw your latest piece in the music cafe, the title, I'd already seen some of your other videos, so I knew what to expect, but Tom's already commented on the alien connection, and so's Vert, and so am I going to. I mean, Alien is, we'll talk about that a bit later, because it's one of my favourite films. So you're saying this is a generative piece of music, and that's sort of outside my field of experience, certainly in terms of producing generative music, because I don't really understand it in terms of composition. I can listen to it, and I'm listening to it now, and I can hear that you get some really interesting sounds out of that thing, and it's definitely something I can sit and listen to for 10 minutes at a time without any problems at all. But I've never really looked at generative stuff, so I'm not sure why that is. Maybe it's because I'm a control freak and I prefer to be in control of the creative process, but you may be too in control of it, and I just lack understanding of what's going on there. That's the most likely explanation for my ignorance. It's certainly got a very techie feel to it, much like how I'd imagined subspace chatter would sound, based on my experience of watching sci-fi movies, particularly a Star Trek TV series, the original series, which was far and away the best of them. This sound right now, that's one of my favourite bits. It's sort of, I've said this about Vert's pieces as well, there's places in his stuff where the sounds sort of coalesce into something really nice, and that would be really, cool to use in a more composed piece. So yeah, lots of things going on here, but I don't know how you're doing it. Going back to the movie Alien, one of the things I really liked about it was it had a really sort of gritty and believable feel to it. The Nostromo itself was a believable spaceship. It wasn't squeaky clean like the USS Enterprise. It was grimy and dirty and ugly. It was very believable as a setting for that story. Here's an interesting question for you. What was the serial number of the USCSS Nostromo? Because there's conflicting information available about it, I think. I've lost my notes now. On the 14th of July, you put up another video where you had some footage from Saturn 3, and I watched that film about 24 hours before you posted the last video, and there were some interesting ideas behind that film, like sort of similarities with both 2001 and with Alien, in that 2001 featured a malign artificial intelligence as a subplot to the main story, and Alien featured a malign android, Ash, as a subplot to the main story there. So I watched that film. I think I'd seen it before, way back in the day, long time ago. And it had a $10 million budget, which was quite considerable in 1980. So it came out the year after Alien. $10 million for a cast of 3 main characters, and Harvey Keitel didn't even speak during the film. The robot cost $1 million on its own. So yeah, it was a bit cheesy, but it was an interesting storyline. They didn't really make the most of it, and I think they could have done better. If you go onto places like Wikipedia or IMDb, you can find out lots of interesting little comments about what was going on whilst that film was made, and there's a lot of conflict between the cast and the directors and the writers and everybody, so it's not really a surprise that film flopped. Well, it's probably made its money back by now, 40 years later. I've changed the lighting again. I've basically got every light on the ground floor turned off now, except for one, which is just casting a sort of ambient glow around the room, and the lighting on my face is actually coming off my monitor. So I'm sitting in the dark here, which is how I like it. I've also ditched the chair for this session because I've realised after listening to the last video that it was creaking and making so much noise. It was quite distracting, so I'm sitting on a stool with a cushion at the moment, and I can move around and not create noises that you might think are coming from my back, but were actually coming from the chair. Well, on the last video you posted on Departure from the Heartland, you were saying that you couldn't really get into Riven, sort of my latest piece. You wanted it to be more broken. I can sort of understand that. It's a weird piece. It's like a 3-part journey. It's got that pocket watch which gets more progressively mangled as the piece goes on. There's that soft sort of almost ambient intro, and then it goes into a sort of plinky plonky, quite not happy but lively middle section. But I didn't want to make that melody too bright and cheerful, because what was coming later was quite gruesome. So yeah, the third part's sort of pretty much pure dark ambient. It's using a couple of synth patches. One of them's an arpeggiated sequence which I've thrown through B2 reverb, so you can barely hear it as an ARP anyway. And then there's a bit of flute in there, which after it's been through the reverb, it's just completely unrecognisable. Yeah, so maybe Riven has got a bit of a prog rock influence in that it's a concept piece based on time and space fracturing, so maybe that gives it a bit of prog rock heritage. Three separate sections hammered into one track. Keep talking about granular, and I haven't yet used it in any of my tracks. There's a new VST called Emergence, which I have played with, and that sounds very promising. I'd like to use that in the future, but it's 64-bit only, and I'm still currently using a 32-bit DAW because I'm really old-fashioned. So one of my tasks this year is to learn how to use NewLab to replace Energy XT, which I'm currently using, but that's a bit of a challenge because I can still use Energy XT. Most of the VSTs still work in there, but I know that more and more developers are now dropping support for 32-bit, so I'm going to have to move over at some point. So when I do, I think granular will be one of the first things I start playing with. On that last video, you also mentioned Future Sound of London. I discovered them by accident in 1996, I think it was. It was in a record shop, just browsing around, and I saw they had a little section for this band. I'd never heard of them, but I was flicking through the CDs. I had a look at the rear, and there was a credit for Robert Fripp on the back cover, so, on an album called Lifeforms. So I thought, I like the album art, so I went out and I bought it, and that was it. That album was a real sort of game changer for me. And over the 5 years following that, I went and bought, I think I bought pretty much all of their albums, but Lifeforms is still my favourite. It's the one that defines them for me. They've got beats, but the music's ambient. You just got to live with that, It's really atmospheric stuff. So yeah, one of my favourite bands, and they're still making music as well. Right, Departure from the Heartlands. Okay. There are two versions of that, you are correct. The original features vocal samples which were actually recorded in a temple with real monks and whatever. And I was kind of concerned that I could have some sort of copyright issue in the future, but I later spoke to one of the monks at the temple, and he sort of encouraged me to put it online, so that's why it's up on SoundCloud. departure from the Heartlands was made to try and get around that, and I pushed an audio sample from, it was a recording from a synth. I think it came from again from an arpeggiated preset in Zeta 2, and I just pull stretched it and then did some pitch shifting on it, and it came out with that string synth sound, and I thought, ooh, that's nice. Now that whole pull stretching audio, messing around with it and then taking it back into the Energy XT session, it's a bit of a pain to do, but it's okay. I'm used to it. And nowadays I can get a similar effect by using a very long reverb, so I don't have to use that pull stretch. And also I've just discovered I can load these samples into Iris and use Iris as basically a sample plug, so it gives me a lot more control, so you'll hear the results of that fairly soon. You said that there's a feeling of melancholy on that departure from the Heartlands, and yeah, I wrote that melody a couple of months after I got back to the UK. This was in 2015. I think the notes were based on that recording I made of the Monks, but because I'd substituted those vocal samples for the process synth, the feel of the track changed a little bit. Yeah, and it was probably melancholy also because I wrote it 2 months afterwards and was thinking back to that time spent sat out on the lake in Thailand just drinking beer, waiting for the storm to appear, and it was just a situation that was so far removed from what I'm used to in everyday life here in the UK. I note that one of the other KVR users in that thread actually thought it would be the perfect track to accompany footage showing how we mistreat the planet, so there you go, somebody else agrees with you there. Redtron is on that track, but only for the flute sound. Everything else is synth. But yeah, Redtron's one of my go-to instruments. I just love the sound of mellotrons, you know. Again, my prog rock upbringing is showing through there, because one of the bands I was in, Hobgoblin, we actually had a mellotron M400, so I was familiar with the sound of that instrument from quite a young age. There's various mellotron emulations out there on the market, but I tend to stick with Redtron because the samples that Taiji Guy put together, like Redtron, particularly Redtron SE, just keep pulling me back. There's more pristine emulations, but I just love the way you get that tape head thump on these samples. It just sounds so realistic. And you can dial it out if you don't like it. Another comment you made was that Departure from the Heartlands is a very simple melody. Well, that's not surprising. They're the only melodies I can write, simple ones. But yeah, there is power in simplicity, I mean, and that not only relates to melodies, the overall construction of a piece of music. It can be difficult to really simplify things. But if you get it right, it can sound really good. My next new track is coming out in about 3 weeks. It's called Soul Rides the Celestial Elevator. Again, that's another sort of ambient piece. Not only with simple, well, I don't even know if it's really got a melody. It sounds quite nice, but I made an effort to make use of the spaces between the notes. Plus, it's got this really long reverb on it, so you get this build-up of harmonic stuff going on that's kind of nice. Another thing I did was I made a conscious effort to finish this track within a day, and I made it, although a couple of days later I decided I wasn't quite happy with the low end, so I remixed it a little bit. It took me about an hour to sort that out, but yeah, it was done in a day. That's the first time I've done that for a while. We're about halfway through here. I might have to speed this up a bit. What I did this time, I watched the video twice and then I went through it a couple of minute chunks writing notes, and then instead of just going straight to making the video, I actually restructured all the notes, so hopefully they flow a bit better and I'm not jumping around too much from subject to subject. But looking at the list of stuff I've got here, that's probably not going to work. One of you callers mentioned writer's block, and I'm not sure I say I've experienced it, but I don't think I actually have. I don't think it's really a block. I think it's more likely apathy or tiredness, outside pressures, or possibly a lack of self-confidence, which has happened to me, and that's always been temporary. And the only way to deal with it is just to work through it and sort it out. If you think, oh, I've got writer's block, I can't do anything this month. No, there's no way to carry it. You've just got to work through it. It'll come back. But it's not writer's block. I think it's more of an internal. It's an excuse for something else. Richard was talking about Brian Eno's little saying that ambient music should be as ignorable as it is memorable. I think that was what he said. And it seems like a good point, but I don't think good or great ambient music is ignorable. If I hear a mediocre piece of ambient music or any music, I can quite easily ignore it, but it won't be memorable. If I think something's good, I'll listen to it. Rick made a point that we were making these videos talking away whilst we have ambient music playing in the background, and that's sort of true. But it's not. I'm not ignoring it when I'm doing it. I can hear it. And it's going in, and I find it tends to focus me. But that's specific to ambient music. That is. I mean, if I was playing some piece of 70s jazz rock in the background, no, that would just distract me. I couldn't do that. That last video you made, there was, and again, I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't work out what it was. I was thinking, what is it? I like it. I think it was Frippanino, but not sure. But I was still able to listen to it even though you were talking, because I don't know, is it multitasking? Trying to put this into words is kind of difficult, but it's certainly not ignorable, unless it's my brain wired differently to everybody else. Yeah, playing ambient type music in the background whilst doing these videos, it gives me a bit of focus. I think it's having this effect in more than just a subliminal sense. There's something to it. This is going to go on for weeks, this debate, isn't it? There was a thread on the Ambient Online website as well about the definition of ambient music, and there was, my take on it was that people who'd come into the genre more recently, than music for airports, when was that, 78? But people who'd only been making this music for 10, maybe 20 years had a different view on what the requirements of it were, and again, a lot of these people were saying bands like Future Sound of London and that were big influences on them. And anyway, that thread on the Ambient Online forum, it never got resolved. Basically, people divided into two separate camps, and that, yeah, it's fine. It was healthy debate. There wasn't any abuse or anything nasty going on. People just agreeing to disagree. 2014, I went to the Ambient Music Conference in Helsinki. So why would you go there to ignore the music? No, it was a good event, and had a couple of days of music and a few beers. What more could you ask for? In your last video you said, I want nothing. It was a quote from Zappa. Actually, what he said was, nothing is what I want. And he said it was a true Zen saying, but it was actually, although it was a laudable statement, it was made in a joke context on a track called Dummy Up from the Live at the Roxy and Elsewhere album in 1974. And it was basically criticising the education system in the United States. I could try and put a link on this video when I put it up, so you can have a listen to it for yourself. But yeah, but moving on from nothing is what I want, you were talking about a lot of rich people, commercialism. Rich people, they tend to buy the stuff they want without realising that they don't need it, whereas the poor people don't buy the stuff they want because they realise they don't need it. So what can you draw from that? So many people make the mistake of confusing want with need. And again, I think commercialism is partly responsible for that. There's lots of people trying to rip you off and sell you stuff that you really shouldn't ought to be buying. You've got this cult of celebrity, which is just a way of diverting people's attention away from what is really going on around them, and the media seem to be embracing that wholeheartedly, you know. It probably makes their jobs easier when all they need to do is report on cosmetic surgery failures rather than get into the depths of economic foreign policy cock-ups. People, yeah, they're very focused on current events, that history is taking a back seat to that. But the problem's almost certainly worse than that even. That people are focused on the media's presentation of those events, which is even more worrying in many cases, because the media have got their own agenda with everything. There was a little section in your last video about Bioshock, so I went reading up on plasmid because I'm not really that familiar with Bioshock. I mean, I've heard of it, but you were the person that really brought it to my attention, and it's quite interesting to read all the detail about what's going on under the covers in there. Some of that stuff in Bioshock almost seems quite prophetic in terms of what's going on in the world with COVID-19. It's concerning. So Bradley mentioned Arcadia's transformation from utopia to dystopia in relation to Bioshock. That track, Et in Arcadia Ego, was concerned with the same situation, but independently. Before I became aware of Bioshock, I was just working from that painting by Nicholas Poussin. So I twisted things around a little in the storyline to make it fit the concept for my album. And I noticed that in the recent Star Trek Picard series, one of the episodes was actually titled Et in Arcadia Ego as well, but I haven't seen that, so I can't comment on the storyline or what they did with that title. So concept albums, yeah, I grew up listening to prog rock, which I've said repeatedly. Concept albums were relatively common. Bands like Yes, Genesis, Jethro Tull and others made them. They were possibly less common in the world of instrumental prog rock, but there were some. So I've got 6 albums or EPs out on Bandcamp. Faders was definitely a concept album. It was after I'd written the first 2 tracks, this idea came up. So the last 2 tracks I put on were definitely written with that goal in mind. On one level, Faders was concerned with life after death and various associated, stories, legends, whatever. And on another level, it was concerned with my feelings about legalities, contracts, broken promises, marketing. And then I had an album called Occultation, which was also a concept album, but it was much looser. It wasn't anywhere near as focused as Faders. It was about things being hidden, partially hidden. But the concept emerged quite late in the making of that album, so it wasn't written from scratch with that idea. The idea developed towards the time when it came to release the album rather than during the writing of it. But it might have been a prophetic statement regarding the ongoing changes that I was making to my musical style, which is still happening. I'm sort of drifting away from beat-oriented music and towards ambient, which is it's not planned. It's just something that's happened, and so maybe things will change again in the future. I don't know. I'm currently working on 2 albums now, but neither of these have got concepts. They're just, one of them is probably going to be close to ambient, and the other will be nowhere near it. I've got 2 tracks ready for the ambient album, but they've been ready to go for at least 4 years. I'm just waiting for some more tracks to get remixed before I put that one together. And the other non-ambient albums, 4 tracks ready to go for that. So maybe I'm halfway through that. See what happens. But there's no concept for this one. It's just going to be a collection of tracks. You said songs talking to each other. Yeah, that definitely does happen in some cases. But it's not always something you realise is happening at the time. I've got tracks that I wrote maybe two years apart, which I suddenly realised, oh yeah, they go well together. But that's just speaking music from a musical perspective, you know. There's no concept on these. We're talking about the way I work. I take a long time over this stuff, yeah. Whereas your stuff is more immediate. You say you can get something done in an hour and a half, 2 hours. Some of my tracks have taken like 40 odd hours of work. Not all in one session, obviously. I mean, 40 hours of work over a couple of years. You know, when I started releasing stuff, it wasn't even mixed, so I was putting it on the internet, and then people said, well, you need to mix this. So I went away, thought about it, and then eventually figured out what I was supposed to do and started mixing them. But yeah, these days if I write a track I tend to mix it at the same time, and if I'm lucky I can get a track finished in a single day. And that, to me, that feels quick. But then, yeah, your stuff's got more of an element of improvisation in it, which I guess I'm not really involved in at this stage. My experimentation is infusing styles together. I like having a track go in one direction and then sort of hijacking it halfway through and having it go off in a completely different way. That's kind of interesting to me. Don't know why. It's just something that it sort of appeals to me. Maybe confounding people's expectations. I don't know, I've got a few things to say. Oh yeah, one thing I wanted to talk about was movie villains. I find the villains far more interesting than the heroes. There was a Western over 50 years ago now. Sergio Leone directed it. It's called Once Upon a Time in the West. and he cast Henry Fonda as the villain, which was, well, it was brilliant at the time, because Henry Fonda was one of Hollywood's, clean guys, quite literally a blue-eyed boy, and they cast him as the villain, and that sort of shocked a lot of people at the time, and it worked out really well. It was a great film. I think people focus on the villains because they may feel shortchanged by Hollywood's moralistic, patronising attitude towards its audience, an attitude that is almost certainly driven by financial considerations. So yeah, I like the villains. They seem to have more depth than the average hero, If a hero in a film is troubled, then that's going to be a more riveting watch than watching Mr. Clean do his stuff. I mean, Superman was okay, but Clark Kent, he was so nice. You didn't really have any empathy towards him as a character because he was squeaky clean. Right, I've been rattling on for over 40 minutes. I've still got things to say, but I think it's a good time to stop now. And I'm actually a bit earlier than usual. It's only 1:30 in the morning, so I can get an early night tonight. I'll talk to you again later. Bye for now.